What's that? No, planning has been working on it. Zoning less so, I think, because zoning. When you're ready. Hello, everybody. Thank you guys so much for coming. Call this meeting of the New Shoreham Town Council to order. Today is Tuesday, October 8th. It is 4:03 p.m. As everybody knows, feel free to move up. This is a work session. As most of you know, certainly all of the planning folks who have been dealing with these same new ordinances that we've been dealing with on the council. If your Sosha was here last night, David was here last night, Jen was here last night. I feel like every time I look at them, there's another implication. So, I think the council's strong desire was to continue talking about this stuff as much as possible, socialize it as much as possible, because some of the changes are substantial, even just procedurally, if not if we hope to sort of not inviting significant difference in development, but procedurally it's very different. So Karen was kind enough to prepare a 1.5, 2-pager on some of the sort of practical changes in roles. And she's going to go through that. And then I'd like it to be Q&A, conversation. What does this mean? Maybe it's the first of several, because we still have how many, Karen? A half dozen that we have to do after last night?
At least.
Yeah, at least a half dozen. So anyway, Karen.
Thank you. So for those of you who don't know me, and I see many familiar faces, I am Attorney Karen Browning. I am the land use attorney for the town of New Shoreham. And as most of you know, there have been significant changes at the state law level on many aspects having to do with zoning and land use. And we've all talked about them in the various boards and at the council level to get a significant number of amendments passed to bring the town into conformance. But what I wanted to talk to everyone about tonight in the work session is procedurally, how does that affect individual board members? And my goal for tonight, and when I sat down to think about this work session, was I really wanted to try to give new members and old members or established members a helpful overview, and also maybe some helpful tips that might make it just a little bit easier to sit on a board. You're all very busy. And if there's a way that, we can do things a little bit differently that make things easier on everyone, why not try it? So to that extent, I have up here, and I think copies were circulated of a handout. Just so you know, the copies up here do have the wrong date on them, but the information is the same. The handout was drafted with the idea in mind that you could, if you wanted, have it with you at the hearing. It's split up, it's many pages, but it's split up by category. So if you do have an application in front of you and you're thinking to yourself, hey, that variance changed, that variance standard just changed, what is it? I want to take another look. Just turn to that page while you're hearing the testimony, and it might help you also to frame your questions and make your decision. There's also information in there about appeals and major, minor land development projects. And certainly if something's not covered, let me know. I'm happy to put together a one page to add to it. Absolutely not. Go ahead. Do you have a question now? Okay. Okay. Moving on. So, no, sure, absolutely. Just a basic kind of structural overview of zoning amendments. Zoning is enacted by the town council. The state of Rhode Island, under the Zoning Enabling Act, gives that power to the towns to do. Your town council is in charge of enacting and amending your zoning ordinances. That is a legislative function. That has not changed under the new laws. After that, the ordinance is then in place and it is up to staff and the various boards to manage it, oversee it, and enforce it. So that said, there is a lot of work, which board members certainly know, council members know. There's a lot of work that goes into getting something on the agenda. From the time that staff gets the first phone call about a potential application, there's a lot of meetings and things that happen to get all of that information into an application that's then ready to be heard by the board. Procedurally, there are changes that have occurred that are a result of the new state law changes, both for staff who review those applications and the boards who hear the applications at a meeting. Procedurally, the biggest changes and the ones I'm going to touch on tonight are unified development review, which we've talked a lot about. I think people are pretty well versed in that, so we'll be quick on that one. Appeals, technical review committee, and development plan review. As to changes in procedure, we'll take unified development review first. This law gives the power to the planning board to grant zoning relief. So when a planning application also needs zoning relief, it now stays with planning to get both, usually at the same hearing. This obviously expands the duties of the planning board and reduces the duties of the zoning board. Procedurally, remember, planning board members who are hearing applications under unified development review, you will have to first approve or deny the zoning relief. If it is approved, it must be conditioned on the applicant receiving final plan approval before that zoning relief can go into effect. Once the zoning relief for the project is granted, then the land development or planning board approval can be granted. And right, that makes sense, because if you were to do it the other way and you approve the permit application and then you fail to approve the zoning relief, then what do? You've got an application you just approved that can't exist. So it's important that those conditions, that vote happen in that order, and that condition goes in the approval. For additional information on UDR is at page 10 of the handout. Yeah.
Is the statute do anything to limit the amount of time, change the limits on the amount of time the offer and kind of acceleration consideration?
Not under unified development review. You actually are obliged to follow the time clock for the underlying level or level of review. So if it's a variance, special use permit, you have to abide by that standard time clock. There's no shortening of it. Appeals, many of you have heard that appeals of town decisions either go to zoning board or straight to court. Decisions of the zoning and the push here is now many more decisions will go right from a town decision right to court. It used to be that almost everything stopped at the zoning board. Zoning board would sit as an appeal board and hear many things. That has been reduced, not completely eliminated. So you may see more things getting appealed that all of a sudden pop up in court and you're thinking, why didn't this go to the zoning board on appeal? It doesn't have to anymore. Specifically, I mean, I don't know. I can just tell you from my experience practicing in the arena. Usually zoning board decisions on appeal get appealed to court anyway. So, yes, and the Rhode Island legislature also set up a new land use court. And under statute, land use appeals are given priority in time to get them heard quickly. So I think that my gut is they just wanted to kind of skip that process because they knew it was going to go to court anyway. So decisions of the zoning enforcement officer still go to the zoning board of appeal. After that, there's a second right of appeal to court, like we just talked about. Decisions of the zoning board or the zoning board of appeal, planning board, administrative officer now go right to court. And there's some more information in the packet at 18. Moving on to technical review committee. The technical review committee for the town of New Shoreham was established by the council in a recent adoption of an ordinance amendment to section 604 of your ordinances. By ordinance, the technical review committee has to consist of at least 3 members who are appointed by the planning board. Now, there's some additional information in your ordinance about the different types of persons who would be appointed to that technical review committee. The idea being that they should all have some sort of expertise in one area or another to be able to review an application and give advice, both to the applicant and also to whatever board is going to hear it.
Planning board receives an application that says does the planning board have the option of handling that group?
So the group is impaneled and standing, and whether they are used or not is still being worked out. And I say that because the technical review committee by ordinance has the planning board by ordinance has an obligation to enact rules and regulations for that committee. And within those rules and regulations, it will say which applications and when they go. Those rules and regs are still being drafted. Okay, so which ones are going to go to the TRC is still being worked out. The local level, that is a local function, but yes. And I can talk a little bit about just the last draft that we're considering so you can kind of get an idea, but this is not final. Major land development and subdivision applications at all stages. Right now, the draft says that all of those at each stage, they would go to the TRC. Again, that could change. Public improvement guarantees, if they are being considered, those would go to the TRC. The TRC may also review, again in a draft, preliminary plan for minor projects and minor changes to plans, and possibly zoning relief if zoning issues end up being referred to planning, but that's a whole other conversation. So that section is still being worked out. The TRC's job is going to be to conduct technical reviews of applications and provide recommendations to the planning board or zoning board or the administrative officer. All recommendations of the TRC are advisory. There's nothing binding. That means that the AO, the planning board, or the zoning board, whoever is actually deciding the application still maintains that autonomy. The TRC is just making a recommendation. So procedurally, once the TRC rules and regs are adopted by planning, those applications that are subject to that review under the technical review committee will be sent to the TRC by planning first before the planning board decides. So I know your planning board will meet, accept applications and set them for hearing. That might be the time that you then say that the planning board then votes, okay, we're going to also send this to the technical review committee because the rules and regs say that this is the type of application that needs that review. For the zoning board, if the zoning board were to seek planning board review of a zoning relief request, the planning board could then, depending on the rules and regs, also send that to the TRC. And what then bounces back to those boards is a written recommendation. The TRC would meet, they'd converse, they'd have probably something like a workshop, discuss all the ideas that they have, make some recommendations to the applicant, and then make some recommendations to the board. That would be in a writing. That writing has to go to the applicant before the next meeting. Makes sense, right? You don't want the applicant to be out there not knowing what the TRC ended up putting in their writing. And then that writing would also be in your packets so that you would have it and you would have the benefit of that recommendation from the TRC at the time you hear the matter. And then finally, for the procedural changes is DPR, Development Plan Review. That is at page 8 of the handout. This is new stuff in New Shoreham. There are 2 types of development plan review, formal and informal or administrative. So who hears them? Your informal or administrative are just that, they're administrative. Your administrative officer would typically hear those. And there are criteria. If you meet the informal criteria, it goes administratively, and there's typically no hearing. A formal one for DPR goes to the planning board. So what's the difference? You got a formal DPR, or you got a major land development. DPR is thought of as a lesser review than your land development projects. Historically, this has been on the books for a while. They have to be decided by specific and objective criteria. And those criteria for you are found in your ordinance. So I would recommend that if you do have a formal DPR matter before you, that you pull the criteria ahead of time from your ordinance, and that way you have them. So you're listening and you're thinking, okay, did they hit all their check marks? Can I ask them? They missed one. Can I ask them about it? You know, what's your opinion on this? And see what evidence they have to give you so that you are prepared. Yeah. Yeah, great question. I mean, they wouldn't review it as to like any procedures or anything like that. But the administrative officer is the chair of that committee. So if there's a zoning issue, first, it probably is going to get flagged before they even get to TRC. But if something else should pop up, that would come up at that meeting. But predominantly, it's going to be things like fire, police, engineering, building, giving them all a chance to see the plans and sit with the applicant to ask questions.
Sorry. Yeah, please. Along the lines of Mary's question.
Oh, no, it's not. No, it is. So for example, we had a house a couple of months ago, a big house and a large house. And it was the height, we were like, you know, the height, it kept coming up. They were within an inch of their 32 feet or something crazy. Then there was not a whole lot of leeway. Like, would we in that instance say, like, because you guys saw it too, like, we're sending you to TR, what did you call it? Technical Review Committee, TRC?
Yep.
And that, is that what we would do?
No, the TRC would meet and review it beforehand.
So we're not sending people. We're not sending people to TRC.
As a zoning
Jens?
board, as
Yeah,
a
yeah.
zoning board or generally.
No, as zoning board. As zoning board.
If you were to, and forgive me because stuff like this hasn't completely been baked
Right,
into the
right.
regs yet. Assuming that, that the TRC would hear, zoning relief, say dimensional variances.
Mhm.
Then, if the zoning board were to send that matter to planning for a recommendation, which sometimes you do,
Right?
the planning board would have the ability to send it to TRC for an executive.
But so something that's in a special use permit
Mhm,
doesn't need a variance,
mhm.
but we're like, you know, we're always like, you have to have it remeasured. We went through it. You have to have the house remeasured and all these things. Like, wouldn't technical review doesn't get involved in that?
That is the question for the rules and regs. that
Okay.
haven't been finalized.
Okay.
That might be something that we want to consider, giving the TRC, giving the zoning board a straight line to TRC review.
Mhm.
That's something we can consider, but that would be something that needs to be fleshed out in the rules and regs for the TRC that the planning board adopts.
Okay.
In a perfect world, the TRC, if I were on zoning, or planning, having a TRC say, you know what, this actually kind of works, or, our recommendation is that would be very helpful to me, because so it seems to me that, unburdened by what the conversations have been, that giving zoning also the ability to say, hey, Jen, this should go to the TRC, makes some sense to me.
I agree. I also would say this, if that isn't something that ends up happening, you do have the ability to call on town staff
Right.
to review plans.
Right.
So if that's something that you want the building official specifically to look at something, you want the fire department or the police department to look at something, that's always an option as well.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, any other questions on those kind of major procedural headings? Yeah.
Could you please review what the state's rationale is behind these changes?
I mean, I don't know for sure. It's not as though I was not there. I don't know what the real impetus was, but just as an attorney who practices land use, I believe it was both to spur development, especially in the arena of housing and affordable housing, and also to streamline the process of permitting. That there may have been some concern about how long the process was taking. And I think you see that specifically with Unified Development Review, where the state said no more bouncing back and forth between planning board, zoning board, back to planning board. They wanted to streamline that process. Anyone?
Oh, yeah, just quickly, getting back to the review process. Is this group also, I'm stuck on do they also give design advice? Is that considered advice? It's not specific and objective, or is it?
Are we talking about development plan review? or
No,
the
no,
technical
sorry.
review-
No,
Technical review
The
committee?
technical review.
Okay,
committee.
so DPR is where the body who is hearing the matter has to decide it on specific and objective criteria. That would be the planning board or the administrative officer. The technical review committee can give design advice, especially if it's something that they feel is something that the town typically either
Yeah.
likes to see, will approve. And also, hey, in the past, other people have come forward with
Yeah.
this particular idea and it just hasn't passed.
Mhm.
Now that doesn't bind
Mm.
the board, that doesn't bind the applicant. The applicant can go forward in whatever way they want.
Okay, thanks.
Procedural question.
Yeah.
Will you be discussing special use permits separately? Or
Yes,
is it now a good time to ask a question about that?
you can, yeah, definitely ask it.
Okay.
Good segue.
So my biggest worry about all of this
Yep.
is the phrase that says, if a special use permit does not have criteria already established, it is permitted by right. And that just scares the pants off of me.
Yeah.
So what do you see our town being able to do to protect ourselves?
Great question. And that scared the pants off your planner and me and your administrative officer. So that was the number one priority, I would say, that staff had when these changes happened, because we knew that that could be problematic. Excuse me. And that's why Weston Sampson was charged, your consultant was charged with drafting those very criteria as the number one priority. So you already have those criteria in place. So that's done. You're welcome. Anything else? Okay, so this is, I just wanted to go over too, I've been your land use council for about a year. There's some other things I think with the new changes that just might be helpful for you to know. Up to you, whether you want to implement them or not. And also just some kind of heads up that I think might help. So most minor land development and subdivisions will now go to the administrative officer to approve. This is going to be an increase in administrative officer responsibilities. Most or all final plan applications also go to the administrative officer to approve, subject to any findings or conditions placed on the project prior. What does that mean? You've got a major land development project. It's got 3 stages: master, preliminary, and final plan. By the time it gets to final plan, that is a decision of the administrative officer. The board delegates that decision to the administrative officer. When the administrative officer gets the final plan application, can they just do whatever they want? No, they have to abide by whatever conditions and decisions came before. So if there's a master plan and a preliminary plan decision, and then the final application comes in, the AO looks at it, it's not as though anything that the board has done before that is going to be undone, just so everybody knows that. There is a list on page 4 that talks about your administrative officer. I tried my best, because I know this has been a source of some conversation, to kind of do some bullet points. The top section are existing responsibilities. The bottom section is new stuff. But I guess we're gonna have to see how, all that plays out. For zoning board and planning board members, dimensional variances. The standard to approve dimensional variances has changed. Take a look at page 11, especially when an application like that is in front of you. It's going to be really helpful to have that. And your job is to make sure, again, that the applicant is providing you with enough information for you to approve. Each one of those standards has to be met. That also can guide your questions and decisions, which all should be based on those elements. For dimensional variance, those elements are set by state law. Use variances are very rare. The reason is because the standard is so high. The standard for use variance is that the land or building cannot yield any beneficial use if they have to comply with zoning. That's very difficult of a standard to achieve. But if for some reason you do get one, the standards in the packet, you can follow that. Special use permits, which we just mentioned. Same thing as variances, except the criteria are not in state law, they're in your local ordinance. So again, if you have a special use permit in front of you, maybe a good idea, grab the criteria or ask staff or me for a copy, and you can have those ready so that you're checking off all those boxes. So, and the reason why you keep hearing me say that, have your elements in front of you, is this. When you issue a decision, a written decision, there is a right of appeal. And what the courts have said in Rhode Island is that if you just list the criteria that you are supposed to approve by, it's very difficult for the court to uphold that. It's not enough. What the courts want to see are each individual one of those criteria and what evidence you had on the record that supported that criteria. So if there are 5 criteria, my advice would be to list each one when you're drafting the decision, and then look at your notes from the hearing and add in, as to this criteria, the board heard evidence that this. Each one of those findings of fact should be supported by evidence from the record. Something else that I think is important, especially for the town of New Shoreham, personal knowledge, right? Everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows almost every property that comes before you. You can use personal knowledge in your decision-making. The courts have said that that's okay. However, if you do this, and that's happening in a meeting for you, you just have to reference the personal knowledge that you have and say what facts you got from that knowledge and what conclusion you made. So it's just basically an example of, I drive by this property every day. It's my factual information that it is very heavily traveled. Therefore, I believe that, I don't know, traffic study is warranted. That kind of a thing. You've got to, it's okay to use personal knowledge, but you've got to make it clear that that's what you're doing. And you have to be clear about what conclusion you're drawing from your personal knowledge. Board basics, which have changed a little bit. Planning board is now a minimum of 5 with up to 2 alternates. And here's where things get a little funny, and I'm not sure if there's going to be a court case on this or not. Land development and subdivision approvals before the planning board are only approved by a majority vote of the members present at the time of the vote. That's standard. But now, we know the planning board can sometimes approve zoning relief. Zoning board member already know what I'm going to say. To approve a request for zoning, if it's the planning board, you have to have a majority vote of the members present at the hearing at which the request was heard. So what's the difference? The difference is, if it's a zoning matter, you have to have attended all the meetings. So just keep that in mind. That could be a little bit tricky. Yeah.
Steve, do you mind commenting?
Yeah, sure. Karen, you said all the meetings. Do you mean, like the initial meeting to have the application heard?
No, I won't
Zoning.
worry about that too much because it's administrative and there's no public hearing there.
Okay.
Yep.
Great, thanks.
The hearing, yeah, where the evidence is taken and the public is able to speak.
Okay, thanks. Oh, and who's the administrative officer? Is that Jan?
That's Jen.
Oh.
Yeah. It's one of Jen's hats.
Zoning.
She is. Jen is both your zoning officer and your administrative officer. Yes. For your zoning board, it's 5 members, and at least 2 alternates, but up to 4. And the idea there is because the standard has been, you have to be at every hearing. They wanted to have more alternates so that you always had somebody available to hear it and therefore somebody available to vote. The chair of the zoning board can administer oaths and can compel attendance of witnesses by issuing subpoenas. So quite there. Should you need to exercise that? Alternates. While alternates should try to make every meeting and absolutely should be participating in meetings, questions, things like that. Alternates only vote if a board member cannot. So if you are first alternate, you do not vote unless someone on the board cannot. Second alternate, same thing. There have to be 2 missing board members for you to vote. Zoning board, important. This is not in the statute, it's in case law. A maximum of 5 can vote. If more than 5 vote, it could invalidate the decision. So keep that in mind. Other changes to hearing and notice. Public hearings do not include anything done administratively. So if Jen or administrative officer is making an approval, that is done by staff. However, they will be reporting on those at the meetings. They are oftentimes also appealable. So those decisions will still be recorded on land evidence, posted in the clerk's office, and then reported on at the next hearing. Notice requirements for hearings have been expanded under the new law, just so you know. Your notice typically would go to like the 200-foot abutters and be circulated in the paper. It used to be a paper of general circulation. There was a lot of lobbying action going on because everyone just started assuming it was the Providence Journal. That got very expensive. Nobody was reading it. And then now they changed, the law changed to local circulation. So now you don't have to, you can just do a local paper. The notice has also expanded to website. So that I think is a good thing. They've gotten rid of certified mail. So what that means is that mail is now first-class mail, goes right to your mailbox. And I'll tell you from my experience, most people who get the certified mail don't want to sign for it, don't want to pick it up, think it's something bad. So the first-class mail, I don't know what's going to happen. I anticipate more people will actually get it, and it won't get stuck at the post office. And no change to other notice. So all your agendas are still going to Secretary of State. As well as your meeting schedule for the year, all of that stuff stay the same. So that is all I have unless there are other questions. Oh, wow. Okay. What is the line? I didn't know there would be math.
I have a feeling that the place where we will have questions and you guys will get questions is, how'd they build that house on that lot?
Yeah.
Right?
And
So I think the more, this is not a quiz of you, I just think we have to call it out when we get the opportunity.
yeah, it's a great question, and it's a very difficult fact intensive question. And Jen has spent a lot of time on those. So Jen, if you don't mind me kicking this part over to you, can you talk about your experience with that change?
I guess what question do you have? Like how many we processed or what are we seeing?
This strikes me as
It will, definitely. Not yet until things are built, but some of them have 5-foot setbacks. And lot coverage could be 10% now, lot building coverage, I should say.
right.
There's probably, I could go get my binder, but there's probably 25 that I've.
Really?
Mhm.
Wow.
I mean,
But
you,
the
you,
main
you
point
ran,
being that these are automatic.
These are automatic by right.
but you ran through a lot of this for us before,
We did, yeah.
and I don't remember what meeting that was. But some of the highlights were like the percentage of lots out here that are non-conforming, and
75% of the lots in the residential A zone are non-conforming.
I think that's something that people don't realize.
And I'm really only doing the calculations, the worksheets, if someone has an active project, like they're really planning to build a garage or whatever. Yes, and it's just to avoid that. It's like-
I have a question, Jen or Karen, on the 2024 change in the substandard law. Because as I read your description, let me just. Only, why don't you describe the 2024 change so that I don't.
Yeah, so so for those of you who are following along, page 15 of the handout, there's non-conforming development, substandard lots of record, which discusses this topic. And while the first change that came gave an automatic reduction in setback frontage and lot width requirements, and also an automatic increase in maximum building coverage, then the next year in 2024, the legislature again amended the law to include new language to the effect that if a substandard lot would be standard in another zoning district, the town applies the lot frontage, lot width, etc. requirements of that zoning district. Only if the lot would be substandard in all districts, the proportional reduction discussed in that first amendment is applied.
The part that I'm not clear on is whether or not it could be a commercial zone versus a residential zone. And that's where we haven't really talked about that yet, but
Yeah, and I expect
I-
that's gonna come up when we go back to re-amend that ordinance, because although the language from the first statute change has been adopted and incorporated into the town's ordinance, the new language from the just happened 2024 session has not been adopted by the town.
correct.
So I'll speak really loudly. It's so I'm in the RA zone. I have a 60,000 square foot lot, which is very standard for the RA zone, but it's standard for the RB zone. You would apply the RB zone's standards.
Yes.
Maybe right. We haven't passed that yet. We haven't amended our zoning.
But if
ordinance yet.
that was,
Yeah.
that's essentially.
That's generally what that's what the law says, yeah.
But my strength is what Jen was saying, is Well, in the Old Harbor Commercial District, you can have virtually 100% lot coverage. I mean, that's not true.
And there's no way that you would apply a commercial zone
Right.
to a residential zone, I would think. But
Well, because I'm so old, I remember when the plat maps came into being. It was very exciting. And I'm really familiar with a lot of them. And when this came up, it was kind of like, for me, it's like pick up a plat map and look at it. You can tell there are extraordinary number of substandard lots on this. Mansion Road is a really good example. There are a couple of big pieces of land, and there are 0.28, 0.44, 1.4, 1.4, 1.4, 1.5. And none of those, I think everybody in this room knows darn well, none of those lots are going to be solve the housing crisis in Rhode Island.
right.
I don't think anything on the shore is. That's my editorial comment, but it really would behoove people to look beyond their own boundaries and see just how much is out there that's being impacted.
And we're going to put that on the planning board agenda for November, December, just now that I have some data to report. Because earlier we just didn't have anything yet, like we had a few. But so we can evaluate, they can take a look at it and see if anything needs to be amended and also so everybody knows what's happening with it.
Following up on Kate's example with the the 2-acre substandard lot in the A zone, which becomes standard in the B zone because it's only 1.5 acres, instead of 3 acres. So if you've got that 2-acre, now you've got the 60,000 square feet complying with the B lot rules. Does that mean you can get a footprint that's a 60,000 square foot lot would be eligible for? A 60,000 foot, yeah, the lot size, if the lot size was 60,000 square feet, but you're following the B rules, can you have the footprint that a 60,000 square foot? You would. So you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it's all requirements, yes.
So moving on to follow behind to Martha's comment. When I listen to these discussions, and I always seem to be struck with so much of the reality is that the legislator is dictating to us. So if all the neighbors, in fact, look around at surrounding properties, not just their own little spot, and see what the significance of this impact is, what do we do about it? Is there anything that can be done? I'm left with the impression there's nothing can be done.
I think that's a really good question because we on the council, as you know, David, because you're here so frequently for council meetings, have been passing these because we have to. And with every one, I think this feels like a problem. This feels like a solution to a problem that didn't exist here. And have been wondering about the appetite at the legislature for towns to go and say, this isn't quite a fit for us. So at least for me, I think we should keep that as an active possibility. And as we were discussing last night, look. When a legislative body does something as comprehensive as this, it'll be rewritten more than once because that's not because the legislature is incompetent. It's because it's really hard to track all of the variables when and sometimes you don't know when something is problematic until someone actually starts to build it and people say, wait a second, so.
Thank you.
All they got to do is look at a map. I mean, I'm sorry. I have. Please do, because that's one of the this came up before. Well, I think I voted against this because I just thought it was horrific and classic peg hole. Solutions, yeah, solutions for, it may be a solution somewhere else. It's not a solution here. And it's not a solution along the shore.
Comments. I had written down that what this plan considers to be a small project for Providence, for example, would not would not be small for Block Island. In other words, one size does not fit all. So my question last night, or my thought last night was, what appeals process is there available for us to communicate with the state in a timely manner? And not overwhelm either ourselves or them, but say, you know, these are some basic issues that we have right now. Do we have an appeals process?
No, you don't have an appeals process, but there are legislative committees who meet on land use issues. And, you know, the public process is such that if you or the town or anybody wanted to write a letter to that committee or testify, that's a public right. There is an appeals process for decisions that are made. So if a decision by a board is made that involves one of these substandard lots, or the administrative officer, someone with right standing to appeal could appeal that decision.
I see.
And that would go to court. It wouldn't go to the legislature, though.
So each time you say, make sure you know these rules and those regulations, so you come prepared to your, in our case, a planning board meeting, isn't that the planner's responsibility?
No,
No.
no. Your planner's responsibility and your staff's responsibility is to handle pre-application meetings, answer questions from the public, assist in the administrative task of accepting and handling applications, setting agendas. The list goes on, all administrative review and managerial. Once the matter is put on a board's agenda, it is up to the board to approve or deny it, not the planner, not the staff. You may get written recommendations from, say, your planner or from a technical review committee, but as a board member, it is up to the board to approve or deny a project. Everything else is advisory to you.
What I'm envisioning needing, however, is when a planning board makes these new decisions, that we have an attorney present who says, make sure that you are aware of this or that or whatnot.
Yes.
Will we?
Yes, which is part of the reason why we're doing the workshops tonight. So
Okay.
this is the type of information that you're going to hear from me at planning and zoning meetings.
Okay, that's good.
As these things come up. But there's so much of it that it just makes sense to at least give you a primer and a discussion, and also an opportunity to open that communication.
Okay.
So that going forward, yes, you'll have me at hearings, but you'll also know that you can ask me these questions anytime.
Good. Thank you.
Make a comment. I'm going to use one of Keith's lines, unburdened by actual knowledge of how boards have been operating lately. I chaired the zoning board back in the 80s when all hell was breaking loose. And hey, you know what? Northeastern versus the town of New Shoreham was a landmark case in this state. We prevailed. There isn't a motel over at Smugglers. it does feel sometimes as though everything goes to the planner, as though the planner is an attorney. And that, I'm glad that's getting clarified. I think that's really important. Thank you.
I thought this was extremely useful today. What I'd like to do is try it for 6, 9 months, however long, and then have another one of these, because what I think may work, we might find in actual fact does not work, and vice versa. So I'd like to do a follow-up. So then we could all be on the same page of what doesn't work, and then maybe we talk about the next step of how to communicate this to Providence. So I would request that, I don't know what the time frame, 6 months,
Right,
9 months,
yeah.
a year, but something that we could decide, yes, works, no, it doesn't work, and then how we can go about trying to make some changes if we feel strong enough to want to go that route. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also think that 6 months to 9 months, I think we'll be relying on Jen and Karen and Amy to give us a sense of the extent to which this is going to require new investment by the town in resources on this. Because the thing that there's a couple things that come to mind. One I was talking about, that was the non-conforming. The other is, the land use office has a lot of, it appears to me, a lot of new responsibilities, and some of them significant. But I don't think a lot was taken away. So, so, we have to have a broader conversation as a community about sort of the whole planning function, I think. Not just as it relates to land use, but I to follow up on Margie's point, I think we're going to have to live with this a little bit and see. Any other questions on this? No? Thank you guys for coming. Yes, yeah, I was about to, yeah. This, if I recall correctly, or item number 2, which everybody may want to stay for, is, of course, who wouldn't? We have had situations that you're all well aware of where our ordinances, in terms of things that are not permitted, rides versus games, for example, where, we have, I think there's a notion of what's permitted and not permitted. And then there's what our ordinance says. Tents in the commercial district, for example, would be a good example. And I can't remember who it was, but we thought about putting this on a work session agenda. These are the general prohibitions in the zoning ordinance. Some of them very well fleshed out. Some of them not particularly. Some of them rely on what everyone's understanding of a game room might be, or what a raceway might be, or what constitutes a commercial kennel. I'm literally just sort of whatever catches my eye. I think, Karen, I don't know whether you're going to offer anything on this, but I do think it would behoove us. Tents is the most recent example, frankly. It would behoove us to sort of be thinking about this list and potentially rewriting the section of the ordinance to be a little bit more descriptive. I mean, I'm thinking of what we also always used to hear from Bill Landry and then from Karen when I was on zoning. You have to be specific, and that's where you get hung up. maybe not at planning or zoning, but certainly in Superior Court, I can tell you. That would be my introduction to this list. And Karen, not to put a lot on your plate, but I think it might be helpful from you and Nick and James. If I to look through that just to say, is there anything that could bear some either removal, by the way, or fortification?
Yeah, so if I could
Please.
respond. So I did have a chance to look at this issue, and we are talking about section 111 of the zoning ordinance, which is your general prohibitions. Keeping in mind that this is a very broad ordinance section, it is intended and says that it is aimed at nuisances. It's aimed at prohibiting nuisances in the town. I would say, without having checked, educated guess, every town would have this, right? We don't want nuisances. It's pretty straightforward. What this ordinance does is go on to say that the following is a list of the things we're thinking about that are nuisances and are therefore prohibited. The ordinance also says that this list is not exhaustive. There could be other things. So it's a pretty broad ordinance. I am a big fan of definitions in zoning ordinances. So my mind went right to, okay, which ones of these are defined and which ones are not? And I counted there are at least 15 terms in these listed prohibited uses that are not defined. If you want to, add to this list, subtract from it, that's certainly a discussion we can have. That's a policy decision. Not really a legal question. But as to the 15 that there are no definitions, it would be my advice that definitions are drafted and then put into the definitions section of the ordinance. And then belts and suspenders, I would also recommend that a quick search of the rest of the ordinance be done for that new definition to make sure it is consistent through the whole ordinance. That would be the plan that I would put into effect legally. Yes. Yes. We can do that.
But I think it makes sense to engage in that process myself, just from, my very short 4 years on the council. It feels like one of the reasons we struggle is, something comes up that's not defined. And then we try to make sure that we can fit the thing in as opposed to going with a definition that exists.
Right. So I think what I could do is I can take my notes and forward them to administrative officer and at some point put it on the agenda, circulate that information to the planning board, put it on a planning board agenda for discussion. No, thank you.